Let me ask this question. Would there be any drawbacks to us if we were to Splitsville?
I think yes.
Really?
I suppose we could smack a tariff on everything that comes out of the Port of Los Angeles and make back our money in a hurry. But
as an independent country, wouldn't we be healthier? We have a lower debt to GDP ratio, than the country as a whole.
If you look practically, I think, given our fiscal outlook, we do not have a backup maybe by the federal government. I think the IMF would be knocking on our door the day after we announced our independence and would try to force in some sort of austerity regime to eliminate this persistent structural deficit.
Darry,
I'm thinking I don't want to have to use a passport to go to Las Vegas. Now, of course, the way things are going, we may have to anyway. So, when TSA requires that, then maybe I'm for secession. No, I'm listening to all this, and I think it's very fascinating. And I'm thinking, and again, I've worked in a lot of other states. Indiana is politically about as different as California as you can imagine, right? And Washington State's a whole other thing, depending on whether you're in the east part or the west part. And I'm thinking, in a place like Indiana, they deeply resent the feds because the feds come in and make them do things they don't want to do. It's like being in the South, we had to integrate the black people and the white people, and they didn't like that, right? And I'm thinking, okay, what do the feds make us do in California that we don't want to do? And maybe there were some folks in the audience who can think of something, or maybe some of the panelists.
Spend money on prisons that we would maybe rather spend elsewhere. Fix our prisons.
But the prisons are abysmal, right? We deserve that. So, but fundamentally, I think the whole notion is, and I was referring to this earlier, that we impose our will on the rest of the country. We're the ones who passed the Clean Car Bill in 2002, and it was historic, and it led to all this discussion about global warming and ending our reliance on petroleum. We're the ones who tend to innovate, and we ultimately, because we're so persuasive, impose our will on the rest of the country. So there may be a list of grievances that come from the fact that the feds make us do things we don't want to do, but compared with a lot of other states I've worked in, that's not the notion here. So I'm thinking, why bother to go through this? We're ahead of the feds, we're not behind the feds.
Abe, you want to get in on this?
Yeah, I'm the professor on the panel, but we professors are impatient with absolutely academic questions like the one you're posing. And I think the last comment that was made is exactly in the spirit I wanted to emphasize. Because let's be practical. We're not going to be an independent country. But quoting another of the things our governor said, that's undoubtedly in your book, I remember listening to him give the State of the State speech a couple of years ago, where he said, now let's talk about climate change. The first thing that has to change is the climate in Washington, which prevents the federal government from dealing adequately with a major threat that has to be dealt with, that affects us here. And we can't wait for the federal government to solve this problem. We have to do what we can here to have an impact on it. And that's really what the automobile emissions thing, which precedes the current governor, but in any case, it's part of a tradition of innovation that you're referring to. And I think that's exactly what we need to do on a range of issues. I don't know a lot about these financial issues, but on the international policy questions, you take, for example, the border with Mexico. That's a very complex and important issue. It is not seen adequately from the distance of Washington or Mexico City. It's seen much more adequately from Texas and California and the states of Mexico. And the Pacific Council had a task force chaired by Alan Burson, who then had
the former U.S. Attorney and school superintendent in San Diego,
who chaired our task force. Then he went into the government. He's now Commissioner of Immigration, of Customs and Immigration, and Border Protection, and so practical position to do things about this. But there are things that in the San Diego area and on the other side can be done to improve what happens at the crossing points, to improve the environment and education and public health on both sides of the border that don't require federal action, that can be done. And we should be doing as much innovation along those lines as we can. and not think of this as something, you're talking about hostility to Washington. I think the most important thing that you said was that mainly the attitude has not been so much hostility as, let them stay as far away from us as we can. We have a lot that we'd just like to do. But we need to follow up on that by actually doing the things.
On this, Joe, I mean, this idea is the kind of thing that Carrie McWilliams would call perilous remedies for present evils. And we Californians like that. The dramatic, the silver bullet, let's get this all fixed in one stroke with our tremendous imagination and our penchant for innovation. And it doesn't always serve us that well. I mean, there are some little tiny things that we